Good morning or good day, depending upon where you're watching this from. I'm Robert Knechel, and I have the pleasure to host this panel discussion on the reporting, disclosure, and assurance related to sustainability in the world. We have four very distinguished guests with us that I will briefly introduce, and then I'll let them tell us a little bit about themselves before we get into our discussion. So first, we have Marc Siegel from Ernst & Young in the United States. Then we have Sebastian Dingel from Deloitte in Germany. We have Kinsendal from NHH in Bergen, Norway. And we have Roger Simnett, who is ex-UNSW in Sydney and ex-IAASB. They all have interesting and unique perspectives, and I'm looking very much to their opinions on the issues, be they practical, theoretical, regulatory, related to improving reporting for sustainability in an accountable world. So I'm going to turn it over first to Marc, and then Sebastian and Finn and Roger, and let you introduce yourself just very briefly, and then we'll get off with our comments or questions.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Robert. I'm Marc Siegel. I'm a partner in Ernst & Young in the New York office. I'm a former FASB member and SASB board member, and currently I do thought leadership for Ernst & Young in the Americas on corporate and ESG reporting.
Sebastian?
Yeah, thanks, Robert, from my end as well. Happy to introduce myself. So my name is Sebastian Dingel. I'm a partner in Germany with Deloitte for 2 decades right now into the audit practice, always looking into risks, processes, internal controls and the like. For more than 12 years now into sustainability reporting, currently leader of the sustainability audit and assurance practice here at Deloitte in Germany.
Then it's Finn Kinsendal. I'm associate professor at Norwegian School of Economics, NHH. Just hosted the IAAC conference. Also, we have a research center on sustainable business. Most of my life, I've been an auditor and consulting, though, in EY or Ernst & Young, where I've audited many sustainability reports and also set up the Nordic practice for the sustainability consulting organization. I also now sit in several boards of some of the largest companies in Norway, where I'm head of the accounting committee and do report on these type of reports. Thanks.
Thank you, Roger.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. And I'm Roger Simnett from Australia. As Robert mentioned, I'm an emeritus professor from the University of New South Wales, and also at the moment a research fellow at Deakin University. I have an extensive background from the standards setting approach from an auditing perspective. Was chair and CEO of Australian Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, and had a number of times on the IAASB, including the last 3 years, and chaired their standards on greenhouse gas and their standards on assurance of other than non-financial information. So I'll come from an academic, research, and a standard setting perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. And I'm Robert Knechel from the University of Florida. Also, I have affiliations with the University of Auckland and the University of New South Wales in Australia. And I have a keen interest in the assurance side of this question. So we're going to kick this off with a question. I think I'll start with Marc with really a pretty high level question, which is, what kind of organizational structure is necessary to be able to promote the reporting that we're talking about? How high in the organization does this need to be lodged? What are the implications for the readiness of the organization to be able to report on sustainable information? You know, from your experience, how do you expect this will be working best in many organizations?
It's been interesting. It's been maturing over time, very, very compressed maturation, actually, because historically, most of the ESG reporting has been done by a sustainability function within a company. But now that more and more of this information is being requested in regulatory filings, the finance function is starting to lean in. And the finance function can bring their skills in collecting data, in processing data, controlling data, and that will really help, and build an infrastructure to have reporting at a cadence and a frequency. So the overall governance structure has been evolving, and there's no real one place that it all lives. Sustainability sometimes reports up through finance, sometimes reports up through legal. All that is still in flux right now as things are going on. But the main trend that I'm seeing is with the push to getting more robust and investor grade information ready, the finance function is really starting to lean in.
Okay, thank you. Finn, do you have anything to add from a, say, European perspective?
Yeah, I can just confirm what Marc is saying. I would say 5-10 years ago, we had like 80-20 when the communication and investor relation department was running it. For a joke, internally we said that if the communication department had it, it was greenwashing. 20% in accounting, then it was real stuff. Now we counted. We have asked the 100 largest Norwegian firms about who is responsible for this, and now it's really more 80-20 or 70-30 for the accounting department or the CFO. That means also the risk department is running this at the moment. So it's really getting closer to the type of risk control and the accurate number control that we have seen from the accounting departments.
Roger, you have an Australian perspective. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, look, I would agree with what's been said. I think this has moved so fast over the last couple of years, especially with the demands that are coming from stakeholders and report users. I think companies are struggling a little bit to figure out exactly where they need to be. So exactly what is the corporate governance structure? Who's taking responsibility for this? So I think it's happening much quicker than anything else I've seen. The sustainability reporting and assurance, standard setting, regulation, and demand for information, and companies are struggling to place themselves and get their systems and processes and governance structures right. So I think it's a good time to have this sort of debate to work through these problems and hear from the different perspectives around the world.
Yeah. Sebastian, I'm going to ask you a follow-up here. It's kind of related. Given that the Securities Exchange Commission of the United States has a proposal out to make some reporting mandatory, do you think that's going to have an effect on how an organization approaches these things?
It surely had in Germany, at least. So what you found is really it made its way to board bonus schemes target setting. Also was then, of course, for all the stakeholders quite important to actually work on that one. So in Europe, in particular with the EU taxonomy that came out last year effectively, there was quite a big impact, and also had an impact on how the organizations were built up, because it's very cross-functional. So reflecting that actually bonus schemes at board level were out there, suddenly CFO and CEO stepped into a role to actually really lead on the discussions and the organizational models, and often led to a kind of a hub structure, meaning that, of course, the accounting function was in the middle and facilitated reporting, but you still had to read out to all those content owners in the different corporate functions to actually get the information from those people and build it all into one combined reporting setup. So yes, can confirm that very heavily, Robert. All that regulatory drive in there is changing the way the reports are built, recognized, and the way ESG steering is really happening across the board.
Okay, Marc, in the U.S., because of this proposal, has this become like topic number one at some board meetings?
Absolutely, especially at the audit committee, because as everybody else has sort of said, this is now getting the attention when it starts to become regulatory. The audit committee really starts to pay attention and make sure that the company is putting its best foot forward and making sure that the information that's getting into regulatory filing is controlled. There has to be disclosure controls and procedures in place for anything that's in the front half of a regulatory filing in the U.S. I should also say that, while the finance function is leaning in, what we are not seeing is that the finance people are becoming experts in, say, carbon accounting. They're really just lending their skill set. They're not becoming subject matter experts. They're becoming, they're really just weighing in to use their skill sets in controlling data and finding data and building the infrastructure to do reporting data. No question, it's a topic at the board level and at management team levels too.
And I'll follow up with you, Marc. So Sebastian said that it's starting to affect compensation structures. Do we see that in the United States? Is that going to happen?
We are starting to see that. Yeah, we are definitely starting to see that, and that, of course, this is showing that it's across different parts of the board. So the executive comp committee might be including some ESG targets as part of their overall executive compensation scheme, and that's another reason why you want to make sure that there are good controls in place and robust data collection. Anytime there's executive compensation riding on meeting or exceeding these targets, you want to make sure that you're getting good information in order to make those decisions.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to a slightly different topic, and that's what form of reporting we should see. I mean, historically, we've seen standalone reports. We've seen some attempts at integrated reporting, actually going back 20 years. I mean, Finn, you've been on both sides of the fence, the academic side and the practitioner side. Do you have an opinion on how we might approach this? Is fully integrated reporting really feasible?
That's a tough one. Over time, yes. But if you put too many things in a bowl at the same time, you just get a mess. We even struggle with the framework for financial reporting. So my take on this is that actually first we should fix the sustainability reporting, ensure that we have the right thing to measure and done in an accurate way. And then over time, we can try to integrate it. But at the time, I really think we should focus now on how to report sustainability and do that good first.
So let me follow up with you, Finn, before I go to somebody else. I mean, if you look at financial statements, the traditional financial statement, they kind of all look alike. Are we expecting that sort of, I won't call it standardized, it's probably too strong a term, but that type of structure to evolve? I mean, how close are we?
We have to. Because today, this is like a smorgasbord, as we say in the Nordics. That means that you can just pick and choose a nice number in a way, and you can find the number that make the company look good. And how could an investor try to compare between different companies when there are so many different standards, etc.? So I would say like there was an economist special issue on the sustainability and say that the measure less but better and do more of the same. I think that will benefit everyone.
So you're saying we need to come up with some scoping aspects to figure out what really matters in this reporting, I suspect, if I understood.
Yes,
Sebastian, do you have anything to add to that?
It is brilliant because Finn is picking on the, I guess, biggest roadblock right now, that is the materiality assessment. In particular in Europe now with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, we do find that materiality is a little bit, let's say, underrated. So we are facing a situation where potentially everybody has to report more than is what really is needed for relevant shareholders. So it will be massive what is coming down in the European regulation. And materiality is really key to actually help companies to determine what is relevant in their specific industry, in their specific situation whatsoever, to help building meaningful reports that really drill down a little bit to, what helps, what is material, what has impact, what is really important to understand the situation the company is facing in a changing economic setup.
Well, materiality is certainly important. I was actually going to talk about that a little later, but we can bring it in right now as it affects what should be reported. Roger, I mean, you come from an audit background. Materiality is second nature to auditors in the financial statements. What do you see the challenges of bringing a materiality standard to bear to figure out what actually should be reported and what could be left out?
Lots of challenges at the moment. So the traditional challenges that we're seeing of trying to add apples and oranges together, when we've got things in dollars, it makes sense. It's very easy for the auditor. But there's lots of challenges here. Certainly one of the challenges, and going back to your last question, Robert, is to whether, we go to an integrated report. I think we've got to determine who is the intended audience of the of the report. So if it's got investor focus, then I think we're going to be heading towards a one report type of approach. So the annual report will broaden out to cover off those things that the investors are looking for. But there's always going to be groups outside that also want some information on some more information. And so that's going to be a little bit of a challenge as to where that information is going to reside for a company. But certainly, the double materiality concept that we're seeing coming through has got that sort of flavour, where we've got one there for effectively for the investors, as to making sure that we're capturing all that information, and also that we're reporting broader to other people who have a broader social interest in what the organisation is doing. So I think we're going to go through that discussion a little bit, and companies have to have clarity. So there has to be some clarity brought on that. But the materiality is one of the major challenges facing both reporting and assurance.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point you make, Roger, because, and I'm going to ask Marc next to comment on this, given the perspective of who is the actual intended consumer of the information, presumably that's going to influence what and how you report things. The U.S. tends to be a little more stakeholder-centric. Much of the rest of the world tends to be more stakeholder-centric. Marc, how do you see that playing out? I mean, the SEC technically only has, responsibility over the investment community. I mean, do we see that potentially expanding what we consider important in the United States, for example?
Yeah, this whole topic is fraught with challenges and chances to miscommunicate. So I tend to use the word materiality sparingly and deliberately to avoid miscommunication, because, as Roger so perfectly put it, who that intended audience is really impacts what you're trying to report. And it's fine to report to different kinds of people and through different kinds of communication channels. So yes, in the U.S., the SEC is statutorily mandated to have an investor focus. And I don't see that changing. Laws would have to change in order for the SEC's mandate to change. And so the SEC is treading carefully, or needs to tread carefully to make sure that what they are proposing will meet that investor mandate. Now, that might or might not satisfy the investment community. We'll have to see about that. But it certainly won't satisfy what other parts of the world that are broader than just the investor audience are looking for. And that's why, as Sebastian mentioned, the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, has a double materiality perspective, because its intended audience is beyond investors looking for a lot more information. And so what is trying to be done is set up a building block approach so that there is a foundational level of comparability and sustainability reporting that could then be built on by different jurisdictions to add things to the reporting requirements that would bring in different perspectives for different parts of the world.
Sebastian, would you agree with that perspective? Do you have anything to add from a European perspective?
Yeah, maybe only one thing that is a little bit in between the CSRD and ESRS and the SEC, that would be the ISSB, that could actually play the role of a global standard setter. It's leaning a little bit more towards the shareholder perspective from what we've seen so far. And it will be very interesting to see how that actually plays out, in particular in Europe, because that conflict is very evident. And right now, I mean, on the ESRS, we just closed down on the commenting phase, I think 4 days ago. And I hear many voices that are saying, well, we need to focus a little bit more on the shareholders. Otherwise, the bandwidth of what is relevant in that double materiality is just too broad. And because also the CSRD is pushing all that reporting mandatorily into the management report with mandatory assurance, I mean, that is just a huge effort that is or would be required by companies. So many look towards the ISSB and where they're going to position, as well as what the EFRAG, so the European guys working on the ESRS, will do with all those comments being provided right now.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Roger.
Yeah, I'll just come in there. I think the ISSB is a fascinating body to step into this particular area. It's certainly an indication of the mainstream area. The way I see it on their 2 exposures so far, and what sort of feedback they seem to be getting, is very much an investor focus. So there's a little bit of tension there. It'll be interesting to see how it responds in both US and in Europe. But for the rest of the world, we don't have the developments which have gone on for the for US and Europe, and so we're looking very, very heavily at the ISSB to get some consistency in reporting in this particular area, or give it a focus. And I can see the rest of the world getting heavily behind the ISSB. But it's been 6 months, and so what we've seen in 6 months is pretty amazing from a standard setting process. It certainly didn't happen that quickly while I was on any of the boards.
Shane, you had your hand up?
Yeah, just a comment, because we all agree that we need different report for different purposes. And we talk about how to develop standards, how to audit it, how to measure materiality. I think we have first to define who's the audience, really. And before that, it's very difficult to do anything at all. I can just market an article that my colleagues down the corridor here just made a year ago, Jorgensen et al. 2021, where they sum up all the discussions around materiality. And they even take one more. It's what they call dynamic materiality, which is actually what time perspective should we use? Are we in the long term, 10, 20 years, or is it just the next couple of years, which even makes it more complicated?
I think that's a very good point. That how long of time period we are talking about when we report these things. It's pretty clear when you're talking about contracts that go on for 20 years, but what about a factory that's going to have an environmental effect for its expected useful life? Let me end this topic of reporting with a pretty blunt, simple question. Do you think that who should be signing off on this within an organization? I mean, should we be making CFOs, CEOs, boards be signing these documents? Is that happening already?
I'll start it.
I'll let you volunteer this one.
Okay, yeah. I'll volunteer. I'll put my hand up. I think it should be the board. I think if the board's not willing to stand behind this information, then why should we rely on it? So now there's going to be a lot of pushback on that. And then, if the board has to sign off, they're going to do things within that organisation. They're going to, push very hard internal control systems, governance processes, which are going to better that. So we are seeing that in Australia, and boards sign off on any public release of any other information, and probably around the world. And so I think that's the appropriate thing, because why else should we rely on it if the board's not willing to put their name to it?
Okay. Anybody want to expand on that? Marc?
Yeah, I think what Roger said at the end there, I totally agree with. Whatever mechanism you have in place in your jurisdiction for signing off on financial information, on other information that's going out to the marketplace, I don't think ESG should be any different. So in the U.S., for example, they have CEOs and CFOs that are signing off on financial statements and regulatory filings. So I would expect that over time, aspirationally, it would be those entities with a board oversight over it. But in other parts of the world, if you have the board signing off on the accounts, it should be the board. The point is that this information should be no less or no more important, to my mind, than financial information that's going to the markets over time.
Well, I think that's really useful, and I'm going to actually throw a little shift a little bit, because I said that'd be the last topic or question on this topic, but it made me think about how much infrastructure investment is going to be necessary then if boards are going to be signing on this. This is not something they can do as a side project, it would seem to me. There's going to have to be extensive internal infrastructure investments to make sure the information systems and the controls, which have been mentioned already, work. From your personal experience, Sebastian, how serious is this challenge for a company?
Well, it's a big challenge because it's coming down to data structures, process landscapes, and so on and so forth. So you do not only need to build actually the organization, you also need to enable the organization. That really means you often have to run global projects wherever you're operating to make sure all those, in particular, decentralized KPIs you wish to report on. So in particular in the environmental area, you can actually. So be it water consumption, be it scope 1 or 2 emissions, all that stuff actually needs to be managed. It needs to be captured. It needs to be worked at. And yes, that means we do see a lot of technology push or digitalization push in that area, in those projects, as well as, of course, building and growing organizations to actually work with that.
Okay. Finn, do you have anything else to add? And then we'll shift topics.
I can say that I signed, I think, my first ESG report as an auditor 10 years ago. And the documentation for that was quite loose. And there's been a tremendous development of this the last couple of years. Because how do you measure CO2 emissions in tons? Where they get the number from? And water pollution, et cetera, et cetera. It's really requires some kind of systems. I don't want to have a SOX regime. But we need some kind of structure around it. And yes, it will cost some money. But also, I guess the investors and other stakeholders, they appreciate the accuracy and completeness on these numbers.
Robert,
thank you.
Robert,
Go
can
ahead.
I just make a point? I think there's two elements to this, which is I think the systems need to mature very quickly. Probably your leading companies have systems which are getting there, but it's going to be hard to get the sort of checks and balances that you have in a financial reporting system. And people have to recognise that some of this information might be important, but you're not going to have, the checks and balances that you have with a double entry accounting system or something like that. So that they've got to recognise that probably the integrity of the information may not necessarily be as strong, even once you get a good internal control system in place. But I think certainly, we've gone from back of the envelope Excel spreadsheet calculations to organisations saying, well, we have to make sure that we capture this. But I don't think it's necessarily going to be as reliable type of information, or it'll have greater variation in it than some of the financial that people are used to.
Okay. And I think that's a great segue into the next set of questions, because when we start talking about variability and quality of information, then outsiders, investors, or other parties who want to use this information have to have some confidence that it's reasonably accurate. And as we just heard, that is a significant challenge for most organizations. So what do you think is the role for auditing or assurance within this sustainability reporting model? Should it be mandatory? Is it something that will evolve naturally? To what extent should we have assurance? And I'm going to basically call on everyone at some point. Maybe we'll start with Marc on this one. But I'd like to hear what you all think about this particular topic and the role of assurance to improving the quality of the information. Marc?
Sure. Currently, it's already been evolving. The market has been driving this already, and there's been a pull. So currently, many companies are already voluntarily getting assurance over their sustainability reporting. About a year ago now, the Center for Audit Quality in the U.S. looked at ESG data for S&P 500 companies. More than half of them were already getting some kind of assurance over ESG metrics, some or all of their ESG metrics. I imagine it's going to be more in 2022. And many investors are looking for assurance over ESG data to feel comfortable. And that really was the impetus for the SEC to include an assurance requirement in their proposed rules as they were written with the investor demand in mind. And, we're talking to a lot of investors. There's definitely a consensus, and there's more of the more of the debate is how to phase it in and how quickly to get there and how far to go. So right now the market seems to be around limited assurance, which is kind of like a review type of report over ESG information. And, the SEC proposal would allow for that for a couple of years and then potentially move toward a reasonable assurance model. And really the question is just how far and how fast to go. And I imagine Sebastian and others could talk about what's going on in Europe, which is also similarly trying to think about, the path toward assurance and how far to go. The breadth of the assurance in the European model is on all ESG metrics. In the US right now, the proposal is just to have mandated assurance on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. So it's really whether there'll be assurance or not. I think that's already happened. We're going toward assurance. The question is just going to be how quickly to mandate it and how far to go in mandating it.
Okay, and that's a great way for me to call in Sebastian, I think, here, because I think what you said that really caught my attention was you said some or all. And then you said high, limited assurance, which would be contrary to high assurance from normal auditing standards. So those two dimensions right there where it is not clear where we will end up. So Sebastian, where do you think Europe is today and where might it be heading?
Well, I guess in Europe, I would say since 2017, so since the non-financial reporting directive, the first step was actually enacted in the European countries. Since then, we have seen a strong push towards a minimum limited assurance all over the place. And for those companies that take it more serious or more in-depth, in particular driven by the supervisory boards, we even are right now at reasonable assurance. And therefore, I would also like to comment very briefly on Roger's statement. For those setups, actually, my expectation would always be to find an internal control system that is at the same level as it is for financial reporting. It needs to be sufficient to actually address any risk of material misstatements for the different KPIs. Of course, there are difficulties building up that stuff, but it needs to be there to actually give the comfort level required, and maybe an add-on word on the supervisory boards, because they're a key driver for that assurance demand, because they often are obliged to actually supervise the non-financial reporting, and was called 1 or 2 years ago, at the same level of quality as they have to do for the financial reporting. Yeah, so at least in the German laws, you find that in the same paragraph, actually, just the next sentence, what kind of role the supervisory board has to play. And because they have limitations in what they can actually do personally, they usually engage with the audit firms to actually gain some comfort themselves. And assurance is just so important from an independence perspective to really gain that assurance needed.
Okay. That actually, I think, in some ways takes us back to the first part of our conversation, because one of the takeaways is not, to me, it wasn't clear exactly that we have a, well, for lack of a better word, standardized set of disclosures. So do we end up in a world where if the company decides they want to report it, do they also have to have it assured? Is there a smaller subset that is mandatory reporting, that those are subject to assurance? Roger, I mean, how do you think that will evolve over time?
I think it will evolve. There are certain areas, I think, where the measurement is probably more precise and the standards are more accepted. And I think probably that's in the carbon area. There's, scope 1 and scope 2 in certain countries. In most countries, they will have ways of measuring that which are acceptable. I think with assurance, I think we're on a journey. We've got some companies which are already there, and they're assuring something at least. But even if they're not there, I think if you put, if you go back to my earlier point of making directors or whoever is responsible signing off in these particular areas, I want to know what processes they've had to get comfort on sign off. So even if we don't have assurance, tell us how you got comfort so that you could put your name to it. And I think that's useful information as part of the journey, a journey along here. So, because I think we'll get to assurance, but I think we've got a few challenges with systems of internal control, materiality. Standards have to settle down a little bit. Internal control systems have to mature. And I think we're at a level now where companies need to report this, and we have to understand why they believe it has integrity. I would like to see that sort of approach.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. Finn, okay. I was going to actually ask you something. Let me ask, and then you can comment both ways. Again, Marc said some or all. And okay, so somebody's got to make a decision of what some is or what all is. And I'm just curious, from your experience, again, both as an academic and as a practitioner, who's really deciding what metrics, what information should be reported, and which ones should be assured?
I can just tell the experience from the Nordic countries, because in the Nordic countries, the government owns or have an owner stake in many very large companies. And in Sweden, 10 years ago, the government said that it has to be ESG reporting, and it has to be audited or have a limited assurance. and the quality and the quantity just exploded. That really made a push for the reporting in Sweden. And now this 2 years ago, the government in Norway demanded us as a board to sign off the reports. And I was head of the audit committee. And I just had to say, how can I do this? Okay, I need an auditor to actually come in here and say that the numbers looks okay. And that really boosted also the quality and the focus on this. So I think we need somebody who had to push this in order to get the right quality. No, not all companies should have this audited. Perhaps large listed firms, certain industries, extractive industries, etc. You should start there, I think. No, it should not be fully audited because you have to audit in a context. You need then a framework. You need, as Roger said, you need very precise numbers. I think we should move more from limited assurance to some higher type of assurance and start there.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Sebastian.
Yeah, just a little reflection on the CSRD again. So who has to report starting 2025? All big companies. What is a big company? It doesn't matter if you're listed or not. It means you need to meet 2 out of 3 conditions: more than 250 employees, more than 20 million on your balance sheet, more than 40 million revenue. If you reflect on those numbers, I mean, you can imagine what that means. At large scale, pretty much everybody has to report. What to report? Well, the ESRS, working with the nice wording, rebuttable presumption, which means you have to report everything unless you can prove that some of that, what is in the standards, is not material. What about auditing? Well, that stuff that is in there and has to be included in management report has to undergo limited assurance mandatorily. So that is the future we are facing here in Europe within the next 3 years. So it's massive, and it's making quite a number of companies quite nervous because if you look at just the entry point of when you are obliged to report in accordance with that, it's very, very low. And those companies are not nearly as mature as the big listed companies we're talking about nowadays. So they would need to build up everything from scratch. It's quite an interesting situation.
Just a quick number.
And if I could just add, Robert, I think it's important to point out that what Sebastian's talking about is European laws, but not just applicable to European companies. And so those criteria that he laid out are applicable to any company around the world that is operating within European boundaries. So I think this has within that scope.
Particularities around foreign companies, but in essence, you're right.
At least at the management report. So I'm just saying there are implications for non-European companies for the CSRD that seem to be, I call it a sleeper issue in the US, where companies might not be headquartered in Europe, but they need to evaluate how the CSRD could be impacting them either at the subsidiary level or at the even at the consolidated level.
Let me clarify one thing, or see if somebody can clarify. Throughout this conversation, we've used the word sustainability a lot, but every once in a while, ESG, comes in as a term. I'm curious. Most of the examples I've heard so far are the environmental part. How does any of this apply to the social and governance side of things? I mean, is that being brought in through these legal structures? Sebastian?
Yeah, it's exactly like Roger said. The environmental part is high on the agenda for everybody. Everybody is talking about CO2 consumption. But if you look now into CSRD and the social aspects, in particular looking into supply chains, is growing. So human rights, labor rights, anti-slavery acts, and so on and so forth, are a big hidden sleeper once again, because those are topics that are very fresh, very new. They don't have the same maturity, and they often really affect your supply chain. So it's looking not only at your tier 1 suppliers, but also at your tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. And you need to actually make sure that you're only, procuring from those suppliers that are in line with all those human requirements. We understand, yeah. And so there is quite a big topic in there as well.
And that's,
anybody else want to add to that?
that's a challenge. If you think about supply chain, because you're going to be seeking information not only from your organisation, but from a whole lot of other organisations. So this, it's easy to talk about this stuff as if it's costless, but it's not costless. If you decide to have assurance, there's a cost to it. If you decide to put integrity enhancing mechanisms in place, there's a cost. And what we need is somehow a cost benefit analysis. It's interesting. We look at Europe, and they're gone a long way on what they report, but where the cost benefit, the rest of the world's looking very closely. There's a big role for evidence informed. We need evidence to help us to run the policy. So there's a big role for academics and evidence informed here to help us drive the policy so we get the cost benefit of this approach right. But a lot of the S is narrative. That's hard to assure. There are challenges. It's easier to assure numbers sometimes on materiality than it is narrative. So there's a lot of extra challenges in some of that, the S and the G sort of area.
So what are the costs of doing all this, Finn? Not to put you on the spot.
Yes, that's cool. No, I just looked at development of some of the companies we work with. So I guess some of those companies have spent $1 million just to develop the reports, and they're spending now like $500,000 per year in developing the reports, and then they have auditors for a couple of $100,000 per company. So we talk about quite significant thing, and this is before actually we made a proper internal control system, which would cost another couple of millions. So yes, it has a cost, and I think Roger has a very good point. There must be a balance there between the what's the use of those numbers and the cost. So we have to find a balance. So
well, it seems to me.
A quick comment. In Europe, the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals are very popular to report on. Mm-hmm. And that's really a smorgasbord where you can report on almost everything and you can find everything that suits you. And I think we have to narrow the scope somewhat.
Well, I mean, I've heard many costs mentioned, data structures, internal controls, that both those involve personnel and systems, out-of-pocket costs for external experts. So, I mean, it's pretty clear that this is not an inexpensive adventure that we're going down. And so I agree. I personally agree with Roger to some extent. We need to have a better understanding of some of these things. Right now, I think we're learning and we're being forced to learn quickly. So let me throw out a question. It might be a little awkward to our representatives from the accounting firms, but who really has subject matter expertise to provide this assurance? I mean, is this something that will it be lodged in accounting firms? There's some other market participant that is highly involved and will be involved in providing this assurance? I think this is going to be an interesting evolution too. So I'd like to hear some opinions on that. Anybody? I'm not going to pick on somebody here. I'll ask for a volunteer. Okay, Sebastian, your hand was first.
Thanks. I guess if you're talking subject matter expertise, then the first question is, what are you looking for? And I think you're looking for three key elements. You're looking for audit or assurance skills. So Big Four and all the other practitioners are well suited. You're looking for independence and regulated oversight to make sure they're providing good services. And last but not least, you're looking for, of course, the technical expertise in all those different E, S, and G environments. Now, having that, I think what we've seen in Europe is building respective assurance practices in that arena, and it's very strongly linked because if you think about it, it's not sufficient to only talk isolated about one or the other KPI. You need to bring that into an overall context a company is operating in. So you earlier mentioned what's the useful life of a certain asset in a changing economic environment. When we talk about EU taxonomy, where you're asked to actually talk about CapEx, revenue, OpEx, I mean, yes, you need to understand what makes them green or not green, and that is maybe ESG expertise, but you need to have that strongly linked with also the accounting expertise to understand a little bit, all right, that has to do a little bit with cost accounting, cost controlling, and the likes, to bring those two perspectives together. So to me, having built that expertise, the technical ESG expertise already, and combining it, I guess the audit and assurance firms are best suited to actually go down that route and provide the services needed.
Okay, Marc, I'm going to call on you next, but I recently heard a speech given by a senior partner of an international accounting firm who will remain nameless, and this was public, so I have no idea if the information is accurate, but it was put out in front of an audience of 300 academics mostly, and he said basically right now, he said that about 10 to 15% of these services are provided by accounting firms, but in the future, he thinks it'll be 90% in 5 years. Does that make sense, Marc? Would that coincide with your expectation?
It depends upon which part of the world that you're talking about. Today, in the U.S., for example, I mentioned that a lot of companies, are more than half of the S&P 500 are getting assurance done, and the vast majority of that assurance is being done by non-Big Four, non-accounting firms in the U.S. I know in other parts of the world, the accounting firms do a lot of the assurance. And again, this is an evolution. Remember, there's been decades of maturation of the financial reporting system, decades for all this to develop. And now we're talking about sustainability reporting and trying to comprise that 90 years of maturation into 90 months or 90 days to get it done here. And so this will evolve. The subject matter expertise, I find this question a little bit ironic. I mean, having been a financial standard setter before I was a sustainability standard setter, like auditing new accounting topics is not always easy either. Expected losses, insurance, pension schemes require skill sets that are not typically provided to accounting majors at university. And yet auditors, financial auditors from the big accounting firms are being asked to either learn it themselves or bring in third-party specialists to help them in their audit. I don't see why this is going to be any different. Where you have to have skills as an auditor. Sebastian laid it out nicely. You have to have independence background. You have to understand how to do auditing. That's a science in and of itself. And then, yes, you need the technical expertise. And so I suspect over time, the accounting firms will add some of the technical expertise to the extent that they don't have it already. Right now, they've got at least in the U.S., we've got a core group of subject matter experts and technical experts in ESG that we are sprinkling into the audit practice and including them on audit teams. So I think over time, the accounting firms, are certainly well placed in many of these categories to do well. But some of the large consulting firms who have more of the technical expertise will also develop skills in assurance and independence and be able to compete. And the regulators are going to have to decide what they want in their marketplace. And so far, it seems to me that the SEC, for example, is not limiting. Doesn't seem to be wanting to limit the assurance providers to only the accounting firms, and the CSRD is thinking about that too. And so regulators will ultimately make the call as to who has to provide the assurance. But right now, what the market is the market is allowing for both.
Well, you just said something. I'll get to you in just a second, Roger, and then, or actually, I'll go to Finn next. But I wanted to mention one thing. Your comment about what we are or are not teaching at the universities. I wish I had a whole nother hour to talk about that issue, because in a sense, we are your supply chain, and you need the right resources to bring to the bear on these engagements. So, Finn, you had your hand up. I'll just let you chime in here.
Yeah, first, I just can confirm what Sebastian said, that the skills we were looking for was exactly actually what the Big Four firms in Nordics are looking for as well and recruiting at the moment. But this is a exploding consulting market where there's a lot of money on the table and will be more money on the table the next years. So it's really a question, actually, who will take the highest market share in that. And what's the Big Four firms, the audit firms are very good at? It's very quickly set up organization that can do consulting work. So I think they will take a lead quite quickly in that. And then McKinsey's and BCG's, etc., they more take the very high cost per hour or fee per hour, which will be a more limited market. So I think the audit firms has a very good setup in order to win that competition.
Well, I particularly like this thread that we're on because I have a paper in Accounting Horizons from about a year and a half ago where I talk about the difference between the verification process where auditors have skill sets, and including in that is the global reach, scope, and ability to maintain independence in the face of very large clients versus the subject matter expertise, which is something that I think can be developed. Roger, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, look, I agree with all the challenges. The IAASB has recognised those challenges and they've put some guidance out there on those challenges, very detailed guidance, as a matter of fact. And they're actually reconsidering their standards, their assurance standards. The assurance standards are designed for not only the accounting practitioners, but also non-accounting practitioners to pick up. My own perspective is I like competition. I think that there are some consulting firms that can put the teams together that have the range of expertise that's required. It's interesting as the market evolves, because where you started the discussion, Robert, was, should all this be in one report? Now, if this goes into one report where we're combining financial and non-financial, then it becomes a natural monopoly for the accounting profession. Because they have, as a natural monopoly, they have the financial. So will they be the investor focus, natural monopoly, and then the rest of the competition resides on, the broader stakeholder. So it will be just interesting to see how this plays out.
Well, that comment I agree with completely. And since we're down to the final 5 or 8 minutes, I'm going to basically shift gears here and use that to say, okay, so where are we going? Nobody knows the future. We do know that we're moving rather quickly. A lot's going to depend upon what the SEC in the United States ends up doing, I think, because that has obviously has a huge impact on U.S. companies, and I suspect will have an impact on global operations. So, what's next, and what happens in 2 years, and 5 years, and 10 years? I mean, just in your own opinion. And I think I'll go through the same sequence as we started with Marc going first, if that's all right, and just give me some final comments.
Sure, I would just say buckle up. It's going to be a very, very bumpy ride. What we're starting to see convergence of the standard setters, the voluntary standard setters now, and I think that that's a good thing, and it's been long sought after. But what we are seeing is fragmentation among the regulatory frameworks, and so while there's convergence among the voluntary, we're potentially seeing some fragmentation among what's regulated around the world and what's required, and so that's going to be a bumpy ride for people. At the end of the decade, by the next 10 years, what I expect is that this will be like financial reporting. There will be probably 4 dialects of corporate reporting language that are out there. Like in financial reporting today, you have what's required, and then most companies also issue non-GAAP information to the market. So you've got 2 in the financial space, 2 dialects, and I suspect you'll end up in the same thing with sustainability. You'll have required sustainability, which could vary depending on what jurisdiction you're reporting into. But I also imagine that companies will think that what's required doesn't tell their unique story in a perfect way, and so they will continue to provide voluntary ESG reports and sustainability reports, and you will have potentially 4 different dialects out there. And I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. I think, trying to have 4 different views about what's going on in corporate reporting, the more, if you think about investing as in a mosaic theory, the more tiles you have in the mosaic, the more clear and higher resolution you have in the picture. But that's kind of been my prediction, that there'll be a bumpy ride as we have these different regulations coming out around the world, and the market still demands different kinds of information other than what's regulated.
Thank you. Sebastian?
Yeah, I would have 3 topics actually. So number 1 is I see the same thing Marc sees. I see everybody is really making a huge effort to build a standardized sustainability reporting landscape. However, there's one big thing that roadblock we talked about, that is the materiality concept that needs to be clarified and put in place. Afterwards, in conjunction with that one, I expect a huge rise in sustainable finance, just like the trends we've seen in green bond emissions throughout the last couple of years. That is down to the benefits, actually, of ESG reporting, because you will have huge benefits in having a positive ESG performance, and you will find that in the interest rates. And last but not least, I expect that we can see in a couple of years, maybe more like 5 to 10 years, technical platforms that provide and support that cross-company collaboration and exchange of information to address all those topics that are lingering around in the supply chain, be it Scope 3 emissions or human rights. So those will be the 3 key topics to me.
That last comment I found very fascinating. The idea of we have a super data set out there that allows us to actually monitor this information across companies rather easily. That would be an interesting development if it was to come to pass. Finn.
I set up an organization 10 years ago, and we tried to create the demand, and nothing happened. The last 2-3 years, it just has exploded, and you need the demand. And the demand really exploded when the government and politicians stepped forward and said, we have to have this, and the investors stepped forward and said, we need this kind of reporting. So it's really, I think it's quite important that if they step forward and the regulators demand, like we mentioned, Sebastian mentioned the EU taxonomy, where now more than 50,000 companies have to report in 2025. That's a demand. And as soon as you have the demand, all the consultants and all the firms will really step up and do something. And at the same time, we have to do something with the standards and the regulation, how we report. And that has to go in parallel, those 2 things. And I believe those 2 things will happen at the same time.
Okay, thank you, Finn. Roger, last but certainly not least, where do you think this is all going to end? And what are the biggest obstacles?
Well, that's what I was going to get to. I think what an exciting time we live in. I think I've seen more development in the last 1 year than I have in the previous 20 years of bringing this together from an international perspective to address international problems. So I think we'll get there very quickly. I am worried about the obstacles. I'm worried about the roadblocks, and we need everybody to come along, and that includes we need management to be doing the right thing, and we need them to set up systems and processes to collect the right data. The universities have to start training. Robert, you raised the issue. We've got to think about how we're training for the future. This is the current. So and we're producing people in 2, 3, or 4 years' time. So it's an exciting time. It's a great time. We need evidence to make sure we get the right policy in place, and we need people to start thinking about addressing the roadblocks.
Well, I appreciate that, Roger. The one thing that did not get mentioned that you just alluded to that I will close on, which is the need for research. I did not mention it in my introduction. I am the senior editor of the Accounting Review, one of the higher rated accounting journals. And one of the things that I'm beginning to see is a rapid increase in the quantity and the quality of research related to sustainability and ESG reporting. It's not just the firms. It's not just the assurance providers. It's, I think, it's going to require a global cooperative effort to get where we want to be going. And that means academics and students and a lot of other organizations that aren't necessarily usually at the table when we're talking about the traditional financial statement. And just creating an infrastructure for all that communication to occur, I believe, is going to be a bit of a challenge, because often we're speaking languages that don't overlap very well. When you're talking about someone who has expertise in social issues versus environmental issues versus accounting issues versus business issues, we need to be able to have that system operate in an integrated fashion itself, which means the ability to communicate. So I'm going to thank our panel for some excellent comments. I wish we were live in person so that we could give them a round of applause. At this point, all I can do is give them my personal thanks for taking the time to appear on this panel and give us lots of things to think about going forward. And I'm sure that for those in the audience who end up watching this, any of us would be willing to respond if you want to reach out to us and with questions or comments. and we hope you enjoy the conference in its entirety. So thank you very much to the panel, and thank you very much to the audience who ends up watching this. Thank you. So have a good day.